Hi, I'm Bryant Reed. Welcome to WJZ Star-Spangled Stories. Today we're going to highlight our state's rich history as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of our nation's Declaration of Independence. You may recognize this view. We're at the top of the famous Federal Hill. Standing 80 feet above the inner harbor, the hill served as a lookout during the Revolutionary War. The site became known as Federal Hill in 1788 after a massive celebration to mark our state's ratification of the U.S. Constitution. Today, the hill is a place to remember the patriots who fought for our freedom and for a new nation. Though not the largest or the most powerful of the 13 colonies, Maryland played a crucial role in the American Revolution. Take a look at these stories.
In 1765, Great Britain passed the Stamp Act. All the colonies' legal documents, newspapers, and even playing cards had to be printed on paper produced in London, bearing the mark of the crown. While working in England, Annapolis businessman Zachariah Hood accepted the job of stamp collector for the province of Maryland. But before his return across the Atlantic, word spread of his new appointment. Marylanders burned effigies of Hood, and when his ship finally arrived, an angry mob met Hood at the docks. A crowd of 300 burned down his warehouse, and Hood fled to New York, only to be tracked down by the Sons of Liberty and forced to resign. You could call Charles Carroll of Carrollton Maryland's most famous founding father. An Irish-American farmer, he was originally kept from public office because he was Catholic. But that didn't keep him from fighting for independence under the pen name First Citizen in the Maryland Gazette. He eventually served in the Continental Congress, and Carroll became the last living signatory of the Declaration of Independence. At the time of the Revolution, he was likely the wealthiest man in the country. He was the largest landowner in the state, and consequently the state's largest enslaver. Later in life, he commissioned the Phoenix Shot Tower and laid the first stone of the B&O Railroad. And in the Maryland Senate, he introduced a bill to abolish slavery, but it did not pass. Before the White House, before the Constitution, before George Washington, a Marylander led the nation's first fully ratified government. In 1781, after the Articles of Confederation were approved, John Hanson was elected President of the United States in Congress assembled. A lawyer, a merchant, and a Frederick County sheriff, Hanson was responsible for managing national business, foreign affairs, and war debt. A week after his election, Hanson considered leaving the presidency because of family and poor health. But fellow Congress members urged him to stay and help preserve a fragile republic. Out of a sense of duty, Hanson served his entire term and became what history calls the forgotten president. Talbot County native Tench Tillman became one of the American Revolution's most trusted figures without ever commanding an army. Though many in his family remained loyal to the crown, Tillman worked at George Washington's side as his longest-serving aide-de-camp. He handled critical correspondence, intelligence, and diplomacy, including coordination with America's French allies. Through defeat, victory, and the brutal winter at Valley Forge, Tillman earned Washington's total confidence. And when the British surrendered at Yorktown, Washington chose Tillman to ride nearly 200 miles to deliver the news of victory to Congress. When Tillman died of illness at age 42, Washington wrote, "No man could be more esteemed." We look at a little-known fact about Baltimore. In 1776, the American Revolution wasn't going so well. The British had captured New York City, and then the capital of the United States, Philadelphia, was under serious threat. George Washington's army was retreating. Morale was low, and defeat seemed possible. To avoid capture, the Second Continental Congress evacuated Philadelphia and temporarily moved to Baltimore. For 3 months, they met in the Henry Fight House on what is now Baltimore Street. This gave George Washington time to regroup and was a turning point in the war. So if you live in Baltimore, you can now tell people it was once the capital of the United States. August 1776, less than 2 months after the United States declared independence, King George sends his redcoats to invade Long Island. Severely outnumbered, General George Washington must retreat before the British destroyed the Continental Army. Pennsylvania and Delaware troops failed to protect the escape path, but a few hundred Maryland men stand firm. They hold the line. America lives to fight another day, but less than a dozen Marylanders survive. Tradition holds that while watching the battle, George Washington mourned, "Good God, what brave fellows I must this day lose." A few hundred earned the name the Maryland 400, and Maryland forever bears the name the Old Line State.
It's no secret, Marylanders love their summers, but during the Revolution, Maryland winters tested the will of both sides to win.
We look back to Christmas 1777. Hundreds of Maryland soldiers spent the holiday far from home at Valley Forge. They were part of the legendary Maryland Line. Young men from Baltimore, Annapolis, and small towns across the colony camped in freezing conditions with little food, thin clothing, and no promise of comfort. There were no decorations, no carols, just cold winds and empty stomachs. The troops stood watch, knowing if they could survive the winter, they might help secure a future where Americans could celebrate Christmas in freedom. While the war for independence raged on land, Marylanders were fighting it at sea. British ships pushed into the Chesapeake Bay, threatening trade routes, shipyards, and coastal towns. That winter night, Maryland sailors, many of them fishermen and watermen, stood watch. There were no celebrations, just icy winds and the constant threat of an enemy sail on the horizon. Operating out of Baltimore and Annapolis, Maryland privateers intercepted British supply ships, cutting off resources the enemy needed to fight another year. They didn't ring in the new year with fireworks. They protected it, so a nation could be born. The British were masters of battle on the sea, but when the water became land, it flipped the rules. During the winter of 1780, temperatures dropped so low that the brackish waters of the Chesapeake Bay partially froze. This helped one side much more than the other. The ice was so thick that it supported wagons, cannons, and marching troops. The Patriots were able to surprise their opponents by attacking ships trapped in ice. Some even saw it as a providence intervening. The bitter cold of that year helped them turn the tide, quite literally.
When we return, more stories on how Maryland made its mark on American history. We'll be right back. Welcome back to WJZ's Star-Spangled Stories. Over the past year, WJZ has told over 50 stories about our great state's journey towards life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In sports, industry, technology, even in TV, Maryland is home to many great achievements.
Even though Maryland was the 7th state to join the Union, Maryland is a state of firsts. Known today as the historic National Road, the first major federal highway began in Cumberland in 1811. Chartered in 1827, the Baltimore and Ohio became the first railroad in the United States and launched a new era of transportation. The nation's first umbrella factory was built in Baltimore in 1828. The umbrella business made major breakthroughs in textiles and manufacturing. In 1840, 2 dentists saw the need for a formal education for the profession and helped establish the first dental school in the world, the Baltimore College of Dental Surgery. And Maryland became the home of the nation's first TV station when W3XK began broadcasting out of Wheaton, Maryland in 1928. In the early days of America, Baltimore merchants dreamed of a shortcut between the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware River, avoiding the dangerous 300-mile trip around the Delmarva Peninsula. Thousands of Irish immigrants used picks, shovels, and horse-drawn carts to dig the 14-mile canal, mostly by hand. It opened on October 17, 1829, and quickly became a sailor's highway. At the time, it was called the greatest public work in America. Almost 200 years later, the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal is responsible for nearly 40% of Baltimore's shipping traffic. Arguably the greatest baseball player of all time, George Herman Babe Ruth found his swing in Baltimore. George was a troubled kid. At just 7 years old, his parents sent him to a strict reform school. It was there that he met a monk who taught him discipline, structure, and the fundamentals of baseball. Ruth learned how to throw, and most importantly, hit, by spending hours on the field. There he developed the powerful swing that would one day change the game. At 19, Ruth signed his first professional contract with the minor league Orioles, and though his time with them was short, the nickname he got from his older teammates stuck. And Babe Ruth became the legendary baseball player we all know today. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad was the first steam-powered operated train system in the U.S. It opened in 1830 with a 13-mile track connecting Baltimore to Ellicott City. By the 1970s, the railroad covered over 4,000 miles, with connections to 13 states and the Ohio River. Its creation allowed for passengers and goods to be transported quickly across the Appalachian Mountains from Baltimore, which at the time was the second largest city in America. Later, the railroad would play an instrumental role in ushering the U.S. into the industrial age and new era of growth for the country. And during the Civil War, the train was a critical asset to the Union's supply chain. Today, the legacy of the railroad lives on at the B&O Railroad Museum. When the Channel 13 studios were built in 1948, they were one of the largest television studios on the East Coast. Television was in its infancy, and Channel 13 was a pioneer in its evolution. Originally WAAM, WJZ Channel 13 created hours of original local programming, like the Johns Hopkins Science Review and This Is Your Zoo. Romper Room brought wholesome entertainment to Maryland's children. The Buddy Dean Show brought teens to the studio to dance to the latest hits. People Are Talking brought news anchor Oprah Winfrey to her first talk show. And for decades, WJZ's Eyewitness News set the standard for local news across the country, cementing WJZ as one of the most legendary TV stations in the nation.
The quirky, the spooky, the plain outrageous, you name it, Maryland tells many tales that are stranger than fiction.
We have a magic trick. We're going to make an entire Maryland town disappear. By the early 20th century, the town of Warren had a school, post office, and almost 1,000 residents. But a growing city to the south needed drinking water, and Warren didn't stand a chance. To quench Baltimore's thirst, a reservoir was needed. A deal was made, and the town of Warren was flooded. While terrifying tales of drowning residents are complete myth, submerged buildings and a flagpole that survived for decades were fact. Today, you might know the area by a different name, Loch Raven. We recall the most romantic transatlantic royal scandal of the 20th century, and it all began in Baltimore. Supported by wealthy relatives, Wallis Simpson grew up amongst Baltimore's social elite. She was married to her second husband when she met Edward, the Duke of Windsor, and heir to the royal throne of England. The old king's death threw the country into crisis. How could the future head of the Church of England marry this American divorcee? So Edward abdicated the throne, and Wallis Simpson was the most talked about, written about woman in the world. But with their marriage, the royal line left Edward and instead passed to his brother, the new king, and the patriarch of the royal family of our headlines today. They called it white gold. The oyster business brought the Chesapeake Bay a boom of wealth, greed, and violence that lasted nearly a century. Baltimore had the canneries to pack them and the railroad to ship them. And by the 1880s, the Chesapeake Bay supplied nearly half of the world's consumed oysters. Living with depleted populations, pirates from New England sailed south, and local watermen quickly armed themselves to protect their harvest. But soon Maryland and Virginia watermen poached each other. Hundreds were killed by gunfire. Even Virginia's governor sailed into the fight, capturing 14 Maryland vessels. Annapolis tried to enforce order, creating the Oyster Navy. But the Bay's oyster population has never recovered from what history calls the Oyster Wars. we summon the spirit of one of America's most haunting writers, Edgar Allan Poe. Though born in Boston, Poe's final and mysterious days played out here in Baltimore. In 1849, he was found delirious on a city street, and days later, he was dead. Shrouded in mystery, there were whispers of curses and conspiracies. For decades, an anonymous visitor left roses and cognac at his grave. Today, Poe is remembered for terrifying tales like Fall of the House of Usher and his naming rights to Baltimore's professional football team. Edgar Allan Poe, Maryland's most haunted history.
July 4th isn't the only big birthday this year. Many of our major institutions are celebrating 50, even 150-year anniversaries.
In the late 19th century, a Baltimore businessman made a decision that would transform education and medicine. Johns Hopkins, a Quaker merchant, left $7 million in his will to establish a university and a hospital, the largest philanthropic gift in American history at the time. His vision was groundbreaking, an institution where teaching, research, and patient care would be permanently connected. When the university opened 150 years ago, it became the first research university in the United States. The hospital followed in 1889, setting new standards of medical education and patient care across the country. Long before it became a cornerstone of Baltimore's Inner Harbor, the Maryland Science Center was igniting curiosity across the state. Its roots go back to 1797, when it began as the Maryland Academy of Sciences, one of the oldest scientific institutions in the nation. Nearly 2 centuries later, a new chapter took shape along the waterfront. Ground was broken in 1971 using an actual lunar drill from the Apollo program. And in 1976, the Science Center opened its doors, inviting Marylanders to explore, experiment, and imagine. Over the years, it's brought science to life, from towering dinosaurs and giant screens to live experiments, astronaut visits, and yes, plenty of slime. We're not monkeying around. The Maryland Zoo in Baltimore is turning 150 years old, making it one of the oldest zoos in the country. In the early 1860s, Baltimore residents began donating animals to the caretaker of Druid Hill Park. And by 1880, the zoo featured a collection of nearly 300 animals. In the 1920s, children collected pennies to buy the zoo its first elephant. In the 1940s, reptiles moved into the site of the original Baltimore Aquarium. And in 1949, animal stars appeared in a brand new TV show called This Is Your Zoo, airing on none other than Baltimore's Channel 13.
Coming up, Maryland's pivotal role in the Civil War. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Star Spangled Stories. Behind me here is the last surviving ship from the Civil War, the USS Constellation. The Constellation is a sloop of war, a fast, agile, sail-only warship commissioned by the U.S. Navy. Tens of thousands of Marylanders fought on both sides of the war, and Abraham Lincoln knew that the border state would be vital in order to form a more perfect union.
February 1861. A newly elected Abraham Lincoln must travel from Illinois to Washington, D.C. to take the oath of office. But the route requires a stop in Baltimore, a city rife with sympathies for slavery and secession. Lincoln's head of security believes he's discovered a plot to ambush Lincoln at Camden Station, a plot orchestrated by a Baltimore barber known for his connections to Southern society. In the dead of night, Lincoln slips through the city disguised as a female detective's sickly brother. Lincoln's presidency is safe, but the choice to hide comes at a hard cost. The papers call Lincoln a coward, claiming the threats on his life were nothing more than exaggerated rumors and absurd gossip, claims that would haunt Lincoln for the rest of his life. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and slaveholding states like South Carolina began to secede from the Union. Lincoln feared that Maryland, the northernmost slaveholding state, would secede, and Washington, D.C. would be surrounded. The president ordered the controversial arrest of almost 1/3 of the Maryland General Assembly to prevent them from voting on secession. They and other prominent citizens like Baltimore's mayor were held prisoner at Fort McHenry, including, ironically, Frank Key Howard, newspaper editor and grandson of Francis Scott Key. Howard was taken to Fort McHenry on the anniversary of the very night Key wrote the Star Spangled Banner. September 17, 1862, in the small farming town of Sharpsburg, Maryland, over 22,000 Americans fell. The fighting began early in the morning, and victory teetered between Robert E. Lee's Confederate forces and George B. McClellan's Union Army. The gruesome conflict spread across cornfields, woods, and Antietam Creek. At the end of the day, the North successfully repelled the Southern invasion, emboldening Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation declared all slaves free and reshaped the Civil War into a war for freedom, the single bloodiest battle in American history. Antietam was arguably the most important battle in American history. Before the Battle of Gettysburg was fought in Pennsylvania, the road to that turning point ran directly through Maryland. In the summer of 1863, Confederate General Robert E. Lee led his army north, crossing the Potomac and moving through Maryland towns and farmland. Lee believed Maryland held Southern sympathies. He hoped the invasion would inspire Marylanders to join his ranks, strengthening his army on Northern soil. But that support never came in large numbers. Instead, Maryland remained divided, a border state caught between Union and Confederacy, where loyalties and even families were split apart. Lee's army pushed on into Pennsylvania, and the stage was set for one of the Civil War's most decisive battles. One of the most infamous figures in American history has deep roots in Maryland. John Wilkes Booth was born near Bel Air in 1838, part of a prominent family of actors with strong ties to Confederate sympathies. By the time of the Civil War, Booth was a well-known stage performer. After he assassinated the president during a performance at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., he fled the city on horseback, and his escape route led directly into Maryland. Over the next several days, Booth found shelter, supplies, and even medical treatment, evading capture for nearly 2 weeks before crossing into Virginia. Today, Booth is buried in an unmarked grave in Baltimore, and visitors still leave pennies, each one bearing the face of Abraham Lincoln.
Out of this era emerged one of history's most important Marylanders. Harriet Tubman escaped slavery, then came back to Maryland over a dozen times to free others, including one trip to this pier, where Tubman helped an enslaved woman named Tilly board a steamboat to freedom. And what's less well known about Tubman is her direct role that she played in the war as both a soldier and a spy.
Perhaps history's most famous Marylander, Harriet Tubman, is known for blazing a trail of freedom for escaped slaves along the Underground Railroad. But did you know that Harriet Tubman was a veteran? Disguised as a farmhand or an old woman, Tubman scouted southern plantations and created a spy ring to gather intelligence for the Union Army during the Civil War. She commanded formerly enslaved persons to follow her to Union lines. And in 1863, Tubman became the first woman in our nation's history to lead an armed military operation.
For 250 years, hundreds of thousands of Marylanders have reminded us all that freedom isn't actually free. From the Revolution to modern day, we honor our state's veterans as we thank them for their service and think of those who told their stories of sacrifice.
With a story of a Marylander who refused to let veterans be forgotten, we remember those who died while serving our country. Bowie native Jan Scruggs was 19 when he joined the Army in 1968. The U.S. was at war in Vietnam, and Scruggs returned home wounded to a country unsure how to welcome its veterans. Years later, Scruggs envisioned a memorial that honored the names of friends he lost in Vietnam during an explosion. With little money and wide opposition, the Scruggs lobbied and raised millions for the effort. And in 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was dedicated at the National Mall, listing more than 58,000 names of those who gave their lives for their country.
WJZ Star-Spangled Stories will be right back. Welcome back to WJZ Star-Spangled Stories. 250 years ago, our founding fathers wrote the words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Here in Fells Point, both free and enslaved African Americans hope to make equality a reality in the historic Maritime District. One of those men was Frederick Douglass, who became the most influential African American of his time.
Frederick Douglass helped change the national conversation about slavery, and he found his voice right here in Maryland. His best-selling autobiography tells the story. Born enslaved on the Eastern Shore, Douglass learned the alphabet from the wife of his Baltimore master, who quickly brought lessons to a halt. Determined to read and write, he challenged neighborhood children to outspell him. He studied the signs of the shipyards where he worked, and in the Baltimore shipyards, he grasped the whip of his slave driver and posed as a sailor to escape to freedom. He was the first enslaved man many Northerners had ever heard speak in public, and he risked capture to tell his story. His most famous speech was called, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July."
From before the Civil War to beyond the Civil Rights Movement, African Americans from Maryland have made history, striving to make this nation a land of opportunity for all.
Almost 70 years before the Civil War, Baltimore County-born Benjamin Banneker helped Andrew Ellicott survey the boundaries of the future Washington, D.C. Undoubtedly a genius, Banneker charted the tides and even predicted a solar eclipse. He published a pioneering almanac with precise astronomical and agricultural data. Once, to satisfy his own curiosity, Banneker built a pendulum clock completely out of wood. And in a famous letter to Thomas Jefferson, Banneker cited his education and his scientific achievements to speak against the general prejudice so prevalent in the world against those of his complexion. Born enslaved on the Eastern Shore, Samuel Green purchased his own freedom, then risked everything to help others claim theirs. A minister and a blacksmith, Green became a conductor on the Underground Railroad. He worked closely with Harriet Tubman, helping enslaved people escape north. In Dorchester County, authorities arrested Green, not for helping runaways, but for owning a copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for possessing abolitionist ideas. After his pardon, Green famously received a new copy of Uncle Tom's Cabin from the author herself. Later, he helped found the Centenary Biblical Institute, the school that would one day become Morgan State University. Before Muhammad Ali and before Jack Johnson, there was Joe Gans. Born in Baltimore, Gans shucked oysters before boxing paid the bills. And despite being forced to throw some matches to white opponents, he is still considered by some to be the greatest lightweight boxer of all time. In 1902, the 5'6", 140-pound boxer became the first African-American world champion. He was one of the first professionals to actively study the movements of his opponents, earning himself the nickname the Old Master, even though he died of tuberculosis at 35. Today, Gans continues to provide inspiration to boxers in Maryland and around the country. Before he served on the bench of our highest court, and before he won the landmark case that brought an end to segregation in public schools, Thurgood Marshall attended a segregated public school right here in Baltimore. His father, a waiter, introduced him to the courtroom at an early age, taking Marshall to trials as a hobby. Then, in what is now known as Frederick Douglass High School, a prank landed Marshall in the principal's office. His punishment? To read the Constitution of the United States. The man who would one day be called Mr. Civil Rights heard no when the University of Maryland denied his law school application because of his race. 5 years later, Marshall sued the University of Maryland on behalf of another black student and won.
Maryland history is full of people who helped shape our democracy. In these next stories, we meet some of the women who shaped our culture and served our country.
Did you know that there's a woman's name on the Declaration of Independence? Mary Catherine Goddard was a printer, a publisher, and postmaster of the Baltimore Post Office in 1777. As the British approached, the Continental Congress fled from Philadelphia to Baltimore, and they needed someone to print and distribute copies of the Declaration with the names of all the signatories. They turned to Mary Catherine Goddard, who had opposed the British Stamp Act and who had printed important revolutionary works, including Thomas Paine's Common Sense. Her copy of the Declaration became known as the Goddard Broadside, and despite it being an act of treason, her copy boldly reads, Baltimore in Maryland, printed by Mary Catherine Goddard. From the Civil War to World War II, Maryland women have risked their lives for their country as spies. The most famous of these was Harriet Tubman, who spied for the Union Army in disguise. In plain sight, debutante Anna Carroll socialized among Maryland's elite to dig for information. Her intelligence reached the highest ranks of government, earning her the nickname Lincoln's Secret General. Baltimore native Virginia Hall couldn't serve at first because she lost her leg in a hunting accident. But that didn't stop her from working undercover in France during World War II, where she organized several sabotage operations against the Nazis. Virginia Hall, just one of the long line of lady spies who came from Maryland. One of our country's most influential designers found her passion for fashion in Maryland. Born and raised in Frederick, Claire McCardle pioneered what was called sportswear in ladies' fashion in the 1940s. When World War II made European fabrics hard to come by, McCardle created glamorous designs with working-class fabrics like wool and denim. She helped popularize ballet flats, separates, and her famed popover dress. After the war, her designs empowered women to live an active lifestyle, both inside and outside the home. McCardle became one of the first American names recognized in the fashion world, and her career has inspired American fashion designers ever since. If it weren't for Maryland businesswomen, the Ocean City we know today may never have come to be. In the late 1800s, running a boarding house was one of the few acceptable ways women, especially widows, could earn a living. Spotting the value of an ocean view and an influx of demand, women sought out the remote little fishing town that came to be known as the Ladies' Resort to the Ocean. Women were operating around 60 boarding houses at the turn of the century. These women later came to be known as the petticoat regime. And by 1926, 30 out of 32 hotels were owned by women, and Ocean City became the vacation destination for generations across the region.
Up next, the food that makes Maryland a delicious destination, both by land and by sea.
Looking for a traditional Maryland dessert? Consider the white potato pie. In colonial times, years of tobacco farming began to deplete the nutrients in Maryland soil. So some farmers started growing corn, soybeans, wheat, and of course, potatoes. With potatoes abundant, farmers on the Eastern Shore looked for ways to keep this precious commodity from going to waste, and the white potato pie was born. Some ridiculed the pie as a poor man's dessert, created by those who could not afford high-class ingredients. But this sweet and creamy confection would have been easy to make, easy to transport, and could survive hot summers on the shelf. Today, it's a Maryland classic and a slice of history we can all enjoy. Long before crab feasts covered picnic tables across Maryland, blue crabs were simply part of life along the Chesapeake Bay. For centuries, Native American communities harvested them, developing the first techniques for catching and cooking. When European settlers arrived in the 1600s, they adopted these methods, quickly turning crabs into a reliable everyday food source. The bay made it easy. Its brackish waters created the perfect home for blue crabs. By the 1800s, commercial crabbing was booming. Canning, railroads, and refrigeration helped ship Maryland crab beyond the region, turning a local catch into a national favorite. And back home, it became something more, a Maryland tradition.
More Star Spangled Stories when we return. Welcome back to WJZ's Star Spangled Stories. After the Revolution, the United States realized it needed to protect the Port of Baltimore, so it built a star-shaped fort designed for coverage from crossfire at all angles. They named the fort after James McHenry, a Maryland surgeon and signer of the Declaration of Independence. Maryland is full of cities and landmarks with stories all their own.
As we prepare to celebrate America's 250th birthday, we look local at Maryland's part in our country's independence. This is Jerusalem Mill Village, located along the Gunpowder River in Kingsville. It is one of the country's oldest and most intact mills. The village began taking shape before Harford County was established, and even before there was a United States of America. It also played a major part in the creation of our country. It was here, in a small shack in the back of the mill, that guns were manufactured. They were then used during the Revolution in 1776. Today, it serves as a living history museum and headquarters for Gunpowder Falls State Park. In today's Star-Spangled Story, we go to the heart of Annapolis, where the Severn River meets American history, and we find the home of the United States Naval Academy. In 1845, a young nation needed a professional naval force to protect its interests around the world. Enter Secretary of the Navy, George Bancroft. He had no money from Congress, but plenty of vision. He transformed Fort Severn, a quiet army post, into the United States Naval Academy. Only 50 midshipmen began that first year, but it was the birth of a world-class institution. Since then, the Academy has trained thousands of Navy and Marine Corps officers, and it all began right here in Maryland. The Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the nation, and throughout history, it has shaped our state's identity through its rich natural resources and cultural heritage. In 1608, Captain John Smith led some of the first voyages through the bay, and in the years to follow, pirates attacked ships off the coast. In the 1790s, many African merchants acquired citizenship through the bay's sailing industry. In the War of 1812, the Chesapeake Bay was a crucial location for both American and British troops, and the bay witnessed the first battle of the ironclads, when the Merrimac and the Monitor came to a draw during the Civil War. Generations have made their living harvesting the bounty of the Chesapeake Bay, pivotal to both our environment and our history. Maryland's Chesapeake Bay is dotted with over a dozen historic lighthouses. One of the most famous, the Thomas Point Shoal Lighthouse, has guided ships safely since 1875. It has withstood hurricanes, harsh winters, and the test of time. Lighthouses weren't just navigation tools. They were lifelines for trade, travel, and fishing communities along Maryland's waterways. In 1964, it was automated and no longer required a lighthouse keeper. Today, it is run by the Coast Guard and continues to help mariners navigate safely through the waters of the Chesapeake Bay. Glen Echo Park is one of Maryland's most cultural and historic landmarks. In 1888, an inventor used the profits from his new and improved egg beater to buy the land beside the Potomac to build an educational resort. The park soon hosted the Chautauqua Assembly, the vacation learning movement where families would gather across the country for lectures and entertainment. In the decades to follow, Glen Echo evolved into an amusement park, adding more and more rides, including its famous carousel. But not everyone could enjoy the rides and games. In 1960, civil rights groups came to Glen Echo and campaigned for weeks to desegregate the park, starting with a sit-in on the famous carousel, which stands to this day welcoming all. We go north to the city of Havre de Grace, Maryland. Located at the mouth of the Susquehanna River and head of the Chesapeake Bay, this Hartford County town almost became the permanent political center of the United States. After the Revolution, Congress needed to choose a permanent seat of government. The capital had moved several times already from cities like Philadelphia, New York, and even Annapolis. Havre de Grace was seriously considered because of its location. Positioned midway between the northern and southern states, it was a natural balance of regional power. It sat on Post Road, America's first major highway, which connected Boston to all points south. According to early congressional debates, Havre de Grace missed becoming the capital by only a few votes.
The Battle of Baltimore was the turning point in the War of 1812, a second conflict with the British less than 30 years after our nation's founding. It was here at Fort McHenry where Americans found their flag and their national anthem.
Before that Star-Spangled Banner could wave, it had to be made by hand in Baltimore. Mary Pickersgill learned the trade from her mother, a Revolutionary War flag maker. By 1813, Pickersgill was a widow running her own business when the commander of Fort McHenry's militia gave her an extraordinary request, a flag so large that the British will have no difficulty seeing it from a distance. So Pickersgill and a team of women worked for weeks, late into the night, cutting, stitching, and assembling hundreds of yards of fabric. Over 40 feet long and weighing over 50 pounds, it took 9 men to raise the flag over the fort. But through the perilous fight, the 15 broad stripes and bright stars were still gallantly streaming. Before the bombs fell on Fort McHenry, the fight for Baltimore began on land. In September 1814, British forces landed at North Point, just southeast of the city, preparing to march on Baltimore. They expected a quick victory. Instead, they were met by Maryland militia, citizen soldiers determined to defend their homes. During the battle, an American marksman struck one of the British generals, slowing the advance and shattering morale. Outnumbered, Maryland forces eventually fell back, but not before buying critical time. The next day, as the British moved to the harbor, the United States would preserve its independence, and Marylanders would come to remember the Battle of North Point as Defenders' Day. In September of 1814, as British forces prepared to attack Baltimore, a Maryland lawyer found himself in the middle of history. Francis Scott Key had boarded a British ship to negotiate the release of an American doctor. The mission worked, but the British wouldn't let him leave. Key and his companions were held at sea, forced to watch as the attack began. For 25 hours, rockets and bombs rained down on Fort McHenry, lighting the night sky over Baltimore Harbor. Then, in the early light of morning, he saw it, the American flag still flying above the fort. Relieved and inspired, he began to write a poem that would become a song that would eventually become the anthem of a nation.
An hour's not enough time to talk about the massive impact Maryland has made on our country, but you can watch all these stories anytime at WJZ.com/MD250. Thank you for joining us for this Star-Spangled Special, and thank you for joining WJZ in celebrating the United States of America's 250th anniversary.